Is a Palestinian state really possible despite President Macron's announcement that it is and that he's going to recognize it? My friends, that is not actually going to happen. Have no fear. We're going to unpack it all today. How is Qatar, Tucker Carlson, and Candace Owens got anything to do with this? And are we finally going to see sovereignty in Judea and Samaria? Are the Jewish people actually standing up against the narrative warfare? What is this warfare? Where did it come from? How are the Palestinians succeeding in still dominating media with so many lies? All that and more in today's episode of the Meira Show. Qatar is behind this entire media domination. And the way they've done it is multiple ways, okay? They've done it by owning leadership positions, people behind the scenes. They've done it by financing a huge amount. And they've done it by really understanding this concept of victim narrative. Now, if you've learned or read anything about the woke movement in the United States, you've heard this woke idea, this victim idea being repeated over and over and over again. Whoever's the bigger victim, whoever can provide more content showing that they are really the victim, the other side, they're going to be seen as the oppressor. And it's this very, very unhealthy mindset, which does not acknowledge and does not allow for things like accomplishments, simple accomplishments. The fact that Israel, such a tiny country, the only place surrounded by huge amount of Arabs, the only place for the Jews, has managed to accomplish so much just without brains, with almost no resources to be able to fight back. People don't want to look at that. They want to look at who is suffering more. And when you compare October 7th, which we are very careful about not presenting documentation and footage of in the extremities that we had it, versus what Hamas is doing, right? Hiding behind civilian casualties, but making sure to document all of it. When you see video after video after video after video of this terrible, terrible thing that's happening, Israel immediately becomes the oppressor. And now, why is this significant? Because this week, France declared that they are going to recognize a Palestinian state. And whilst I plan on recognizing that I am a unicorn or a princess or the Queen of Wales, it doesn't really have any legitimacy, because just the basic things that you need to declare a state, like defined borders. Where are the borders of Palestine, so to speak? Is it Judea and Samaria? Is it Gaza? Is there a combination? They haven't come up with that. They don't have any of the things that you actually need for a Palestinian state. And interestingly enough, there are many countries that have declared a Palestinian state before, and it does nothing because it has no legal ramifications. But why is France doing it significant? Well, because France is one of the G7, okay? It's one of the most legitimate democracies to recognize this. And so why is Macron doing this? Because why would you give Hamas, a clear and obvious terrorist state, a prize for October 7th by declaring a Palestinian state? Well, because you need your voters to like you. And whilst Macron at the moment is dealing with a whole bunch of dramas on his own hand, I don't know if you've seen this lawsuit with him against Candace Owens, which is interesting to have a president launching a lawsuit against a civilian, because she's come out with all these interesting claims saying his wife, Brigitte, is actually a man and not really a woman. And that's a discussion for another time. It's very interesting to see that we now know that in France, unfortunately, and in Europe, there is a domination of Muslims, okay? Islam is rising and rising and rising. And this is something that Douglas Murray called out 15 years ago, right? The Strange Death of Europe, a very, very interesting and prophetic book, may I say at this point. He talked about the fact that there is an ongoing strategy, which is not just about media domination. It's about, as we said at the beginning, numbers. The more you can bring numbers in, numbers have power. Money, numbers, and narrative domination are really the trifecta of managing to move your agendas forward. Okay, if you have money, if you have a lot of people supporting something, and you have the media on your side, then you're going to manage to move in many things forward, even if those things are not what the majority want, even if you live in a democracy and the silent majority is doing just that, staying silent and not pulling their weight. So we've got France, and there is 6 to 7 million Muslims living in France right now. Okay, that's 10% of the population. And you know what you can't afford to do when you're a president? You can't afford to avoid such a massive number when it comes to your elections. And so, as the phrase goes, if you can't beat them, join them. Even though I am pretty clear that most of the people in France understand that this is very bad for them, not the Palestinian thing, so to speak, but the Muslim problem. They have a radical Islamic problem on their hands. At the end of the day, Macron needs that group to vote him. He needs their in. And again, this is a pivotal mistake, a mistake that other European countries are taking note of by doing things similar to what America is doing and trying to remove this immigrants. But there's a whole other strategy going on here behind the scenes of this radical Islamic domination, sending tons and tons of immigrants. If you think about it, think about the numbers for a second. You've got like 50 Arab countries, okay? Why? Why did all of these Islamists who come from these countries that have civilian conflicts, why did they have to go to Europe? Why did they have to go there? Why couldn't they go to their own countries, to their own religious countries, right? Why couldn't they show up in Saudi Arabia in the numbers? Why did they have to come to England? And again, if you go back and read the historical documentations and their own public statements, they made it clear that they're interested in coming in the droves so that they can influence public opinion from the ground down. And this is interesting, okay? There's this combination of down, up, and side strategy to take over and create what they hope to be is an Islamic world. And it's just as serious as it sounds, okay? This war has been dumbed down so much into a conflict between Palestinian children versus evil IDF. Okay, that's what they've made this whole thing out to be, but that's not what's going on. This is a fight against radical Islam, and Israel, the Jewish people, the chosen people by God, who have been told that we need to be a light to the nations, are the first ones. We're on the forefront of this. We're the ones fighting back in a real way against the first real attempts of radical Islam to militarily take over another country. At its essence, that is what the Palestinian narrative is. It's an attempt and it's a trial to see how far can they push the Western media using the Western flaws, using the flaws of freedom. And when I say a flaw, I think freedom is very important, but they understand that there is a problem here, a woke mentality that believes in pushing idealism that's completely different to religious idealism. And because of that, they managed to find the things that each country is careful about and go in and dominate in those areas with, again, media, with money, and with numbers, unfortunately. In America, where they don't have the numbers in the same way that they have in Europe, because they couldn't get all of these refugees into America in the same way, they dominated with education, right, from the ground up, coming into the facilities, coming into the infrastructure. And now, as we're starting to see this very, very interested, coordinated attack, which is officially uncoordinated, but it's looking very, very clear that we have people not just from the left, which everybody kind of wasn't expecting, but wasn't particularly surprised that they took the Palestinian side, but we have it from the right. This group within the right, we have these Candace Owens and these Tucker Carlsons coming after Israel. Now, there's a split in how they're doing this. Some are more anti-Semitic, some are coming at us because they think America should be first and we shouldn't be dependent on Israel. But they have all these conspiracy theories, these theories that Israel, the Jewish people, are here to just dominate and take over, instead of recognizing that the Jewish people are a miracle and you should be joining them. If you can't beat them, join them. Why don't they take that for us? Why don't they understand that with us? And that's a very, very crucial question. And that's why I'm not so afraid, because I do believe that their downfall is coming. If you look at the enemies of the Jewish people, their downfall always, always came. And we have history, a huge amount of history to back up these claims. But it is an important thing to remember that what you have here, French President Macron doing these kind of declarations, is a decision to go after numbers and to go after things that he hopes will gain him favor in the eyes of his voters, but at the end of the day is nothing more. And what is the actual ramification of it? Again, it's just diplomatic. There is no legal precedent for this. And this is why we're so, so grateful to the United States, because the way the UN works is that they have few people, a few major countries, okay, sitting on their top council. And for a resolution to pass, that council needs to vote for them. And one group, one country can veto the entire resolution, which is why the US basically vetoes, veto meaning kind of denounces it, says this isn't going to move forward, anything that's really negative against Israel. Okay, so even if he brings forward a motion, the US is basically expected to say goodbye. And this is important because if we lose the US in the UN, then potentially they could legally move forward with this. Okay, there might not be countries to fight against it. There might not be countries to veto it. For example, Russia and China and the UK, not clear that they would do that. And then if we don't have good diplomatic relations with America, potentially they could move forward with this Palestinian state. And that would be very problematic. But let's move forward, okay? Because another really important thing has happened, which is so, so, so important. I can't overstate how important it is for the diplomatic shift and for the narrative shift. Okay. So we've spoken about Judea and Samaria in the past and the complications of Judea and Samaria, because it's right in the heart of Israel and it is divided between Palestinians. We've got area A, we've got area B, we've got area C. And there's Palestinians and Israelis living in it, and it's a hodgepodge, and it is a center for terror, okay? But this week, in an unlegally binding resolution, okay? So similar to what Macron is announcing that he's going to do in the UN, it's more of a diplomatic statement. A huge majority of the Knesset, members of Knesset, our government, moved toward this resolution saying that they want to annex or recognize Judea and Samaria as Israel's sovereign land. Now, this isn't legally binding, and again, there are complications in doing such a thing. For example, what would you do with all the Palestinians that live in a sovereign Judea and Samaria? Would you give 2 to 3 million Palestinians an Israeli passport? Because if we now own this location properly, then they are civilians of Israel. That gives them rights, like voting rights, etc. And that could be very, very complicated. Right now, they connect themselves to the Palestinian state, to the PA. But what happens if we do that? That's something that is not so simple to answer. And this is the question that a lot of people had. Why are we now declaring this idea of annexation of the Judea and Samaria? And why wasn't it done before? Okay, it would make sense that it could have been done many, many, many years ago, in the same way that we've annexed different areas like the Golan Heights. Well, Judea and Samaria has a lot of complications in it, including an uprising in terror if we did that, logistical absolute nightmare. But this first step is an important step in the narrative warfare. You see, I've said from the beginning, I am so against us talking about anti-Semitism all the time. I know that I could bring on here all these anti-Semitic events and freak everybody out and talk about how terrible everything that's going on in the world, but I don't believe that these niche and these unacceptable things should be getting a lot of power. I think we should be fighting back. But I think that the right way to fight back against anti-Semitism is to try and learn the lessons from it and to build our own narrative, not to constantly being responsive to it. Now, if you're somebody who's experiencing anti-Semitism, it is very complicated and is very hard, and I feel for you. I'm not speaking as a Jew who is living in a bubble and who's never experienced anti-Semitism. I've seen my fair share of it, and it is very, very shocking to the core. But at the end of the day, anti-Semitism is here to remind the Jewish people to stand up tall. If they are going to hate us for being Jewish, then we have to be proud of it. We don't have to hide it, and we don't have to move away from it. And this is what's so interesting about Judea and Samaria. If they're going to come in with declarations like a Palestinian state is something that is the world deserves, that Hamas deserves, the Gazan people deserve, then we're going to say, well, actually, Judea and Samaria is ours. This land of Israel, we are done. We are done with this apologetic perspective, this kind of, oh, we're not sure if this is our land. This is our land. Israel is our home. You want to negotiate the complexities of how to make that happen, but we are fighting back in a real way against a narrative which is incorrect, a narrative that is apologetic from the core, from its very root. Israel is the home of the Jewish people. Judea and Samaria is an integral part of that, and we are recognizing that and saying it out loud. And this is a direct response to a Palestinian statement. Even if it happened before, even if it happened after, it doesn't actually matter. It's a narrative warfare. The Palestinian State Declaration by Macron is a diplomatic statement. It proves where he's standing. And Israel is going to have to decide how it moves forward and how it responds to more countries doing it, because now that one of the G7 countries has moved forward, we can expect potentially other important diplomatic countries within Europe to do something similar. But the reality is that Israel's response is going to be strong and needs to be strong and needs to be thought out, because the narrative warfare depends on it. And so why is this narrative so important? Well, let's take this morning. For example, just today, it was announced that we're starting a humanitarian aid dropping stop of the war. It's not an actual stop, it's a few hours, okay? And it's causing an uproar. People in Israel are very unhappy about it. Why? Well, we've started dropping in aid through planes. Now, after this kind of big famine narrative, the Gazans are starving thing has been pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And this is an interesting image that I want you guys to look at, because this is how a lot of Israelis feel. By us providing aid to the Palestinians, what we are doing in return, I actually don't like calling them the Palestinians, by us providing aid to the Gazans, what we are doing in return is strengthening them to harm our soldiers. And this debate of hostages, Palestinians versus our IDF soldiers is a complex one. It's one that a lot of Israelis are not sure where they stand. But the fact is, I think most Israelis can say that they don't feel that the Gazan lives should be more important than our IDF soldiers. And that could potentially be what happens from such a thing. If you keep on sending aid and supporting the Hamas and allowing them to have more and more food and nourish them, and putting a humanitarian pause, allowing them to regroup, these kind of things directly impact our soldiers. And just this morning, unfortunately, we had more IDF casualties. The pain is real and the frustration is real. But what's really important is to realize that the only reason Israel is falling for giving more humanitarian aid, besides being such a humanitarian country, is because of this narrative, because they've managed to spark outrage in the world. They managed to create this idea that, oh, there's a famine, so Israel has to provide. And that's not true. It puts the onus on Israel, and it's not. It's on the Palestinians, it's on Hamas, it's on the Gazans, it's on their countries, it's on all the other countries to deal with it. It's not on Israel's responsibility. It never has been. The Allies didn't feed the Germans, they didn't feed the Nazis, and Israel doesn't need to be feeding radical Islamists. But what happens is when there is a big narrative online, it impacts direct legislation, it impacts direct diplomatic actions here, it impacts our military decisions. And that is really, really unfortunate and problematic. And that is the importance of Israel regaining the narrative. This is not about the Jewish people. This is not about Israel's right to exist. It's not about that. It is about a fight against radical Islam, a belief that radical Islam wants to take over the world and taking them at value, understanding that they believe this, they say this, and they are working every single day to get there. They have managed to shift this into a narrative warfare about Palestine versus Israel and who deserves what, and it is not about that. My friends, this is not about October 7th. I know that's radical to say, but it's not. It's not about what happened then. It's not about a retaliation for that. It's about an understanding that these people who have been saying these things all along, now they actually mean it. Now they're actually acting upon it. And now is the time that we have to eradicate these things at the source, at the core. That's what our Iran war was about. That's what the war with the Houthis is about. By the way, the Houthis are planning like a grand infiltration, and Israel's taking that very seriously, which is interesting. That is what the war with Syria is about. That is what the protection of the Druze is about. It's all about us fighting this radical Islamization that plans to take over the world. And if the Western society can't see it, more than that, if the Western society leadership is being manipulated into this, that is Israel's responsibility to fight back against and to, again, not focus on the nitty-gritty details. I mean, I've seen so many of these interviews now with Piers Morgan and with Candace and with Tucker, and they bring it down to such niche points. Well, do you care about Palestinian children? Piers, do you not care about your own children? Do you not care about the children of England? Do you understand that by you valuing the Palestinian lives over the lives of the European children, of the Jewish children, what you are saying is that their lives one day will no longer be? Because that is the radical Islamist plan. Stop focusing so much on the Palestinian conflict, focusing so much on rubbish statements like, we are going to create a Palestinian state, and understand that this starts with Israelis standing up, with the Jewish people standing up strong and calling it out for what it is. This is radical Islam. They're falling for it. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, these people are falling for it. Why? Because they've managed to turn us into the scapegoat. They've come at us from every direction. They've figured out in such a sophisticated way the ideas that really, really spark each society, and they've gone for those ideas. They've focused in, as we said, on the Western idea of freedom, on American idea of freedom of religion, and they managed to bring in draconian ideas to have people support a terror movement, to believe that rape is just resistance in the name of freedom, in the name of victimhood. They've created these ideas, and they've also managed to target the right. They've also managed to come after people like Candace, like Tucker, and to spark it within them. Every direction we are being attacked, but the fact that we are being attacked makes it even more important and makes us realize that what we are doing is correct, what we are doing is right. For Israelis and for the Jewish people to try and create a narrative of being more of a victim, to out-victimize the Palestinians, is wrong. It doesn't make any sense. People like winners and people like people who stand unapologetically for what they believe. Yes, it's been a shock to the system that somebody like Candace, who we all, probably most of us, actually appreciated for her intelligence, has kind of gone that way. And we'll do an episode probably one day on why that happened. It's a shock to our system, but it makes us demand that we stand up even prouder. That's why Judea and Samaria being annexed is so important. That's why these declarations actually mean something so significant. And that's why things like sending aid in is a problem. It makes us look apologetic once again. That's why the left fighting internally, all of these things are so dangerous and detrimental to the country. That's why we have to fight back against narratives internally that are destroying us from the root. The problem with the Haredi draft, the ultra-Orthodox draft, all of these issues, they should not be the focus right now. The focus needs to be the ultra extreme threat that we are all up against. Radical Islam. And it is time that we focus on that and not just on the nitty-gritty details. That is the way that we win the narrative warfare. That is the way that Israel is seen as a hero at the end of the day. We will, in history, be remembered as a hero, and we have no qualms about that. The Jewish people survive everything, and they'll survive TikTok. We will survive all of these different things because there's no other way for us. And I think that's part of what infuriates these people, is that they realize that trillions and trillions of dollars have gone into bringing us down, and they can't do it. They can't do it, not because of our intelligence, not because of our capabilities, and not because of our true commitment to morality. That is who the Jewish people are, and that is what Israel is at the end of the day. We need to rewrite the story. Put October 7th aside. Remember it as our own conviction, but not keep pushing it. Keep the anti-Semitism as a reminder for ourselves, but not keep pushing that narrative online. We are not going to out-victim these videos that Hamas are creating consistently every single day, in which they put children in front of cameras, they put children in dangerous locations so that they can provide this footage. We're not going to out-victim them online, but we can outsmart them, because that is where the Jewish people have always succeeded. It worked for us with the Beepers, with Hezbollah. It worked for us in Iran. Did you know that came out that we didn't just eliminate their nuclear abilities, we eliminated a whole bunch of other crazy missile things that they were planning to destroy us. We've set them back so far by using our brains, by using our intelligence, and by standing up unapologetically for what we believe. There are so many moments in history that we have remembered incorrectly because of the people who wrote the story. It is time for the people who are on the right side of history to start acting like it, to not be afraid of our own tales, to not move around in circles to try and deal with things like this. Palestinian state, let it go. They can claim whatever they want. It is time for us to call Macron out for exactly what he is, a person who is falling for radical Islamization of his own country, and nothing to do with a Palestinian state. Narrative warfare is going to be complicated always, especially when you're up against numbers, billions of Muslims, huge amounts of money, and a dominating strategy that started many years ago. But there is still hope for us, because if you have a story and you have an unapologetic refusal to step down from that story, and you realize with complete and total conviction that you are on the right side of history, they can't do anything to destroy us. And that is what we're seeing. That is what we're seeing every single day. And that is the importance of you, the people watching this, focusing on that, focusing and remembering what is actually important, not being one of the people who keeps on pushing out these narratives that are incorrect or fighting on niche topics, but rather coming back to this unapologetic Judaism. The fact that we are the chosen people is a complication. It is not a simple thing for us. It is not a gift. It is something that is very hard to actually hold up. And we must not forget that. And that is how we fight back. That is how we call out the Palestinian states for what it is, something that is impossible and something that's never going to happen. We call out Judea and Samaria for what it is, our homeland, and we start fighting back with a narrative that is nothing to do with what they're saying, but rather it totally circumvents it, and it stands up loud and proud against something that is radical, dark, and terrible. That, my friends, is how we are going to win. And on that exciting and fun note, I'm Meira, and I will see you next time.